Sort of. There we go. There's the music. All right. Welcome to the big story. I'm Alex Morrissey. Feeling great. Feeling strong. I got a cup of tea. It'll get me through the day. Today we have Rory McCONVILLE. Hopper,
Huh.
writer extraordinaire. And you're in London?
I am, yeah. No, I'm a bit of a traitor
No,
who
no.
left Ireland and went over to London.
Yeah, well, I wish I was more familiar with the soccer league, and I would say, oh, because you just love Crystal Palace or something. And Chelsea, you're a
I mean,
big
that's
Chelsea fan.
that's. No, actually, I'm horrifically I'm very much the black sheep in my family. There's a lot of sports lovers, but I'm not one of them.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I grew up in a sports watching house, and sports was like a big thing. Big into American football, not very big into baseball.
Mm.
But again, I watched soccer and baseball through like the 90s, and then like Michael Jordan retired. I'm like, kind of done with basketball,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and then I just stopped watching American football after a while. I did get into watching uh your football, aka soccer, which I
Yeah.
really do enjoy. But they make it incredibly hard to watch it here in the States. Like there's forget the time difference. It's just this whole you can't have ESPN. You have to have ESPN plus.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
It's like I just want to watch some games, or matches.
I might be wrong, but I think they're getting to that point over here as well in terms
Uh,
of needing you to.
it's it's the death of a thousand cuts.
Mm.
This is just the age that we live in. It's the death of a thousand cuts. So I've succumbed to my annual fee for Formula One, and I watch that. So it's sport, but
Not as
nobody's
we know it. Yeah.
nobody's running around. They're all rushing to try to get that good parking space at the end of the race.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never really understood the appeal of Formula One until recently when I was talking to a friend of mine who's very into it, and they were just explaining all the mechanics and the fact that you can listen in to what's happening while it's going, and
Yeah,
kind of sold it. I could potentially be converted to Formula One, I think now.
yeah. No, it's got a thing. So yeah, and it's if you're going to watch auto racing, you might as well watch that because all the rest of it is not nearly as well done. So
Yeah, yeah.
so what is it? 6, 7 there? 6?
It is 6:30. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, nice. So Rory, you come to us, through great pedigree. With Declan and Joe. So that was a really nice introduction to have those two guys. And so if anybody can't tell, you're Irish, but you're living in London. How long have you been
I came over here originally in 2013 for about 3 years, and then myself and my girlfriend went to Canada for 2 years.
Oh,
We
wow.
did a year in Vancouver and a year in Toronto,
Hmm.
and then we came back. So then that was probably 2018, and we've been here since.
Nice.
So
Quick. What did you like and dislike about Vancouver and Toronto?
I think Vancouver, very nice place. I think particularly if you have a lot of money, but I think you could probably say that at most places.
Especially
Um,
guy living in London.
yeah, yeah. I very really enjoyed all the outdoorsy stuff you could do in Vancouver. What did I not like? I think the kind of general vibe of the place was a bit more like a retirement village than I would have liked.
Sure.
No offense to everyone in
Oh, no, I
Vancouver.
get it. Yeah.
Toronto, I think I prefer Toronto. Probably, I'm probably more of a big city person
Yeah.
at heart. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we didn't stay there probably tells you that we didn't.
Did you
The
grow up in the city or did you grow up in the country?
Sorry, say that again.
Grow up in the city or in the country?
Well, I mean, I grew up in a city, but like an Irish city is compared to most US cities, I'd say is a fragment, probably as big as a couple of streets in an American city.
Okay. And my wife, she's Irish, so and she's a artist. So she did a residency in Ireland 2 years ago, I think it was 3 years ago. I don't know. The pandemic has sort of wiped my slate clean of when things happen in the
Yeah.
world. But um, so she enjoyed. Did you find it inspirational for your writing, being in these different places?
Um, I suppose probably on some level. Like I don't think I could tell you a specific thing that would like say inspired a particular story, but I think yeah, definitely going to other places and meeting other people is unquestionably helpful for writing.
Yeah, I mean that is true. Because like, I mean, if you stay sort of in the same locale. By the way, what tea are you drinking?
Green tea, green jasmine tea.
I'm having berries. So
Oh right, wow.
yeah.
That's
Um, that came back from the artist residency. She came back with berries. So
right, right.
um, yeah, but it's like it is interesting because like wherever you sort of like call home, while there's a quite a range of human beings in that space, they're all kind of there. There's a similarity that they all share
Yeah,
because of geography and culturally. So when you get to go that traveling route, you do get to see these sort of this whole new sort of like skin on humans. You're like, oh, this is kind of cool, or
yeah.
whoa, that's not cool. Um,
And then there's also those like weird little intersections between different like you see bits that are totally different, but then you see, oh, I know that I've met that type of person before at home,
mhm.
and now they're here. They're just in a slightly different guise.
Right, the accent's different, maybe the cap
Mm,
they're wearing is different, but
yeah.
it's the same thing. That's it. Yeah, no, it's I mean, it's kinda cool, and I think, I mean, I know for me, like, when I do travel, like, I do really find a lot of story inspiration.
Mm,
I bank a lot of where I go. Like, it's funny, I don't take a lot of pictures, I never have. Like, I've just never been a picture taker.
really?
Yes, but
Yeah.
I take all this stuff in, and it just kind of sits there, in this sort of this bin inside, and then the stories kind of like go, oh, it'd be really kind of cool, like because I don't know. I mean, I always try to find like what we always go searching for like the old stuff, you know,
Mm,
because then when you find the old stuff, you find sort of like the mythology behind, of the, in that culture of the time when they made the old stuff. So like when we
yeah.
were in Scotland, like we hunted down these picked forts, like we're in the middle of like nowhere, and they were just, but they're magical, and you're like, oh, there's something cool happening here. So you kind of go, okay, well, I'm just gonna stow that away.
And do you, out of curiosity, do you just store that in your head, or do you write it down, or?
A little bit of both.
Mm,
I try to journal when I travel. That way, like there is some sort of record of what I've been doing or where I went.
yeah.
Worked out really well for Paris because we lost all the pictures we took for Paris. So
Oh,
that was a real heartbreaker.
what was it? The camera? What? How did that come about?
Um, we had a digital camera at the time, and I brought it to work. I downloaded all the images onto a disk and gave
Mm,
my wife the disk. And somehow, between either my putting it on the disk and bringing it to her, or my handing it to her, and somewhere it disappeared in the chain of possession. So all we have are our memories.
it's funny how that just made me think like how much harder it is to properly lose stuff nowadays, or in that regard, just with everything being stored in the cloud and stuff like,
Yeah,
and how that changes.
right. Because this would have been 2008.
Mm,
Yeah, so this is 2008. So the iPhone wasn't the best digital camera you could take a picture with.
yeah,
So the Olympus was a better camera. So you took the pictures on the Olympus or the Canon or whatever the thing was. And then you move, so yeah, because the iPhone pictures were just pretty rudimentary at that
yeah,
point.
yeah, yeah.
And I don't think the cloud was really a thing then. Like, I don't think everything was uploaded at the time.
No, and yeah, probably not. as automatically as it is now.
I know, it's crazy. I mean,
Yeah.
it's cool. You know, it's terrifying and cool at the same time, all in the same time.
Yeah, I get these Google notification things on my phone just being like, the second you leave a restaurant, asking you to leave a review and kind of showing you
Oof.
paths you've walked 3 years ago and stuff like it.
Oh. Yeah, it's like, oh, you missed this restaurant 3 years ago. You were just
Yeah.
half a block away. So that sounds like an American siren. Are you sure you're not in America?
No, pretty sure. I think
Okay,
that's an ambulance, maybe,
okay, maybe.
or possibly a police. I do live near a police station, so it might be a police car as well.
So do you do you have any writing practices? Like, I mean, like I said, like I journal when I travel. Do you have like any daily writing practice that's outside of sitting and writing the stories that you're working on?
I do try and journal sometimes. I kind of go through periods of doing it, and then I fall back out of them again.
Yeah.
But those would be like I'd have a similar, I suppose, like this would be related to stories, but I would kind of, have a Google Docs folder that's just a dump of like any kind of thoughts or kind of things you come across in daily life that you think might be fodder
Yeah.
or something down the line. But in terms of, I think, because it's one of those things you end up doing so much of it that you kind of try to find avenues to not do it if you can.
I can see that. Yeah. So like I use this program called Things.
Okay.
Yeah, and it syncs to your laptop, your phone, and iPad if you happen to have that kind of stuff. But so all these are folders, and within these folders, I have like stuff like, oh, here's some interesting dialogue, so I write it down. Like if
Mm,
I just hear something or think of something, if I have a story idea, I just bank ideas. Like, oh, here's a story, and I'll just keep throwing ideas into that thing, or
right.
just rando stuff, or just character names. I mean, because like I don't know if you're an inveterate band namer, like, oh, that'd be a great name for a band, which I am. It's sort of
No, names are actually they're the bane of my existence in all forms. Like
yeah,
titles, character names, place names. It's the worst. So
it's
I envy that ability.
yeah. I'm always like, I think I have like one of those ears. It's always saying like, I hear a word, I'm like, oh, that word, and then I try to hear that word in a different angle so I can now apply it to something else. I think it's
Right.
it's it's like my background in design and copywriting, so I have this sort of
Mm,
like, how do I turn this or twist this to make it into something? So I feel that that's kind of how the naming process works. Also, like
mm.
I'll hear something like, oh, that's really interesting. Let me just throw that into the name bucket. Um, yeah, but I have my own weaknesses. Maybe names isn't one of them, but there are plenty of others.
And out of curiosity, how much? Because most of the stuff I throw into these docs, it never gets
Oh,
even looked at again. Like,
yeah.
does much of yours make it into?
Um, so if I find myself in a stalemate in some part of my story,
Mm,
I'll go through these folders and I'll just start looking through things and see something that might go like, because it's like, I guess it's like a musician. They're like, oh, hey, like listening to little, like, hey, I played this little bit on my guitar. They record it and they go, oh, that might be a real good fill or whatever the thing is. So it's like one of those kinds of things. And they may not make it over there, but they might just be a springboard to get that next idea going.
yeah.
How do you, I mean, this is good. How do you handle that static period, like when you're writing? Do you have a process like when you're finishing up for the day to make sure that you're going to be somewhere, you're going to be eager tomorrow, or do you have other techniques?
Um. Again, it kind of it's like I kind of try and implement techniques, and then inevitably, you go through periods of being good. I find having with comics, particularly having like a set number of pages, is
Hmm.
very useful just for kind of, and also trying to work like literally on a piece of paper having the amount of pages in an issue or something and crossing them off as I go, because otherwise it's very easy for me to kind of end up one just never kind of reaching a point where in my head a page is finished
Yep.
and then ending the day where I feel I've done nothing,
Right.
which is also a frustration one because I think one of the helpful things actually about comics I find as opposed to other types of writing is that it's quite easy to actually break it down into like progress because
Mhm.
you've got that page by page, panel by panel thing. Um, so that, yeah, I suppose if that would be the kind of thing I'd do.
Yeah. So when you sort of like you get your teeth into a story, like, hey, I really want to make this a thing, whatever the thing
Mm,
might be. Like, how do you start it off? Because like I'm working with a couple people right now, helping them edit their books, and and
mm,
they've been doing these things for years, but they don't seem to have a real sort of codified story. Like
right.
they have this sort of like vague sort of progress that they're going for, and they're like, oh, I'm going to make it 9 issues or 12 issues, whatever the number is. And I like, and for me, like, I need to know like where I'm traveling to. Like, I need to have that sort of that world. Do you like sit down and go, okay, well, I have an idea? Like, do you write like a quick like paragraph kind of synopsis to say, okay, what's the story idea? What is the whole kind of thing? Just to kind of give it some sort of like seed and then start building on that?
I'm trying to think. I think I would typically do a lot of prep work ahead of time. And I think maybe partly because that's like I will outline very, very heavily. So I think I try to do as much of the work beforehand as I can, I suppose.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, that's interesting about the people who were saying about like that they're just like this would be 9 issues or whatever. Because I think it's probably very useful to give yourself that kind of restriction in a way. But I don't think my brain initially goes there unless it's like a work for hire thing
Sure.
where an editor has said it has to be 6 issues or
Sure.
whatever.
Right.
Um,
Come on. What about 7?
yeah, why not? Seven's a great number. Um, yeah, yeah. No, I think it's an interesting one when you're coming up with your own stuff. Is that you almost have to kind of create those restrictions for
Yeah.
yourself as much as you can.
I mean, it's interesting because I think, when you're young, you hear the idea, the term restriction, and you see that as a negative, like
Mm,
it's an instant, like sort of like, don't tell me what to do. I'm a creative person kind of stuff.
yeah,
But like when you get sort of into the process, and I think comics is really one of the ultimate examples of it, is that there is such a restrictive structure to comics that doesn't exist in almost every other medium save television. Um,
mm,
these the page doesn't change shape.
yeah,
Like the page count really doesn't change. Like these are the things that like are sort of like in stone, and you go, okay, so then you have this sort of ability, and it's like, it's what like I think sparks the joy in many graphic designers is that you have this limitation, and that limitation is where you start coming up with these solutions that really surprise you, because you go, oh wow, okay.
yeah, yeah. No, I completely know what you mean about that kind of like you just go into problem solving mode.
Hmm.
Because it's you've got this finite amount of space and you've got well, sometimes you find out you've got far too much story for a particular issue
Yeah.
or something. Um, and then yeah, you just have to figure out how you're going to fit it, and that breeds very interesting solutions sometimes.
Yeah. Do you now, I mean, we really haven't gone into sort of the Rory story. But like, were you doing your own things previously to working with an editor, or like have you had like great sort of like learnings with an editor? Like did that happen with you?
So if you go back say 2014, say I started doing a thing where for like about a year or so I would put out I'd write a short, say between 5 and 10 pages, and get an artist to draw it and like put it online. Um, and that was kind of one of the first. That helped me very much in terms of figuring out, making sure I actually finished things and
Hmm.
starting with shorts. I think then the reason I bring that up is because that kind of helped me get into 2000 AD, and that was probably Matt Smith, who writes or is the editor there, is probably one of the first editors I would have worked with in any significant way, and he is great. Like, I mean, he's incredibly brutal as an editor. He will rip you to pieces, but like, you learn so much from that.
Right.
And I think definitely, even with like Heather Antos now on Time Before Time, I think just having someone who will push back to you. Well, it's an interesting one actually, because with work for hire stuff, you're kind of, at the end of the day, you have to do what they say because they're the editor.
Sure.
But when it's your own stuff, it's just, I think, very useful to have an editor who'll just kind of push back on what you're suggesting, and just to kind of make you work that a little bit harder and see, is this the best way of doing it? Could I do something different? So yeah, I mean, if I'd encourage anyone and everyone, no matter how great they think they are, to work with an editor if they can.
I firmly agree. I think the more you can put your work out to people of, sort of note, whatever note is, before it is a polished thing, because it, like, first off, it allows you to shed the whole it's got to be perfect sort of element, because you're just like, hey, listen, here's the story, and then it's like, all right, this is cool, but I don't understand this. You have this chunk in here and it doesn't make sense to the rest of the whole thing. Yeah, blah, blah, blah. And that's like when you go, okay, either I have to clarify that or ditch it, but it allows you to do that kind of heavy lifting with the lightest amount of touch,
Yeah, because I've gotten into what I would describe as a quagmire, which I feel is what happens if you get into that point and no one else is looking at this, and you're trying to be both writer and editor, which you have to do some editorial work in your own stuff, but you do reach a point where you kind of lose any objectivity, and maybe you can solve those problems eventually with time and whatever, but it'll take you so much longer to get it done.
And identifying the problems, that might be the hardest thing, because you might not recognize, because the story's in your head. So if you're not like it there, because there is a distinction between drawing the story and then writing the story, because the artist, if they don't, like, you can see it on page. Like when I first started, like, writing prose, it was a real struggle for me, because the idea of a drawing was, I can tell whether it's right or wrong just by staring at my drawing. I'm like, like, I got to fix this. So that was an easy sort of solution, sort of pathway. Whether you could actually achieve it, that's a different story. But when it came to like prose, like seeing an entire story in your head is very hard, especially if you're like, a discovery writer. So you're just kind of like la-di-da, la-di-da-da-da. And then next thing you know, you're like, I've got like 150,000 words. And like, I think I've got a story here, like it's tough. But once again, the structure of comics does make it a slightly better thing for that fact. So you were kind of putting your own thing out there. Were you just like sort of an inveterate, like, I gotta create something, or was it like, hey, I think I can like make a go of this, but I need to like show I can make a go of this?
Yeah, I think it was, well, probably a bit of both, but I think, it's just from, you go around to conventions and stuff and ask people, like, how do you get work in comics? And the classic one is always,
you gotta make comics.
You gotta make comics, yeah. So like, with those comics I put out online, every, say I did it for a year, I kind of put every 6 months, I'd print up a couple of them. I'd print up, say, like 6 in one thing and kind of hand them out as portfolio pieces or something. And, it didn't directly lead to any work, but I think it was a great way, again, of kind of teaching me that discipline. I mean, writing in comics, no one's going to give you a job. All you have to just put stuff out there and hope people respond to it. Like, and if you don't draw, you just gotta get some other job, get some money, and pay an artist, because otherwise you're never going to get anything out there.
No, it's so true, and you're so sort of in that company. I mean, every writer I talk with, I mean, that's really the key. It's like, well, just had to do these things on my own, and
Yeah.
and then just keep showing more and more and more. So when you show up 3-4 years in a row to some editor or an artist or a writer, and they go, "Oh, you haven't stopped." Like,
Yeah.
okay, so let's talk.
You are still here like a barnacle, just.
Yeah, and it's like it's funny because like for me, my pathway was a little bit different, because I was in art college in New York City, designing my life to be a comic book artist, and I was really fortunate and got hired right away at Marvel. Like, okay, cool. Graduated from school, got an assignment, and then it was, and I was like, okay, cool. When do I start? And the editor was like, it's not, we haven't even written it yet. And I was like, oh, okay. So, and this was an early Dan Slott work. So Dan was the return. He was the return. He was the art return editor.
Right.
But, he put artwork in envelopes and mailed it back to people.
Yeah.
So Dan is a great guy, and he's super collaborative. Like, he was like right off the bat, like we went out to lunches. We had a really good, working up our, our 8-page story. Like, yeah. But I had no work, like that was all on my own buck. So but nobody would give me work because I hadn't proven myself, even though like I've been hired, I hadn't proven myself. And so no one was going to take that risk. So I went into an editor's office, and she's like, "I don't have any work for you." And I said, "Ugh." And I turned around and I said, well, what if I wrote a story for you? And she's like, "Well, it has to be really good." And I said, "All right, well, that's cool." I'm like, "But if I wrote it and it's good, can I draw it?"
Yeah.
And she's just like, "Well, yeah, but it has to be good." I said, "Okay, fine. And I'm like, could I color it too?" Like I just was asking like for everything that I could do.
Yeah.
Project. But she just kept saying, "Yeah, but it has to be good." So I wrote it, came back, and that was actually my first work, was writing. It wasn't it wasn't drawing. It was getting paid to be a writer. Although my scripting was horrible, and Dan Slott actually ended up scripting my story. So
and what was the story for?
It was for What the?
Oh yeah.
So it was the Clinton era so it was Clinton era, and I had basically the government cutting back on Shield's budget, so they turned the helicarrier into an amusement park. So that was a sort of that was the premise, and AIM and Hydra agents were infiltrating, dressed as families going to Disney World. So that was the conceit, and Dan made it funny. So
it's a good premise, I like that.
Yeah. So, but it was just one of but that was the thing. Like for me, like every time I would try to do submissions for artwork, I never used anybody else's script. I would sit and write my own story, because I'm like, well, I'm going to write the thing that's going to make my work look the best versus, but what I should have done is also handed the typed up script for that thing. So they would be like, "Oh, okay, you can do this too." But I wasn't smart. I was too fixated on one aspect of the business. So 2080, now that's like a freaking amazing publication to be involved with. I mean, so 2000 AD has this sort of like full on rock and roll thing here in the States. Like that is like the alternative rock scene of comics, that we don't have in this country. So when we were exposed to that in the 80s, we're like, this is the most amazing thing. So what is the perception of 2000 AD, like from your point of view, like when you were getting, to work with it then?
Oh, I mean, when like I got into it, it was huge. Like, 'cause I mean, I suppose historically it's been such a stepping stone for so many people. And like kind of, within the UK, it's probably like the top comic you could be working on.
Okay.
And there's so many previously great people who've come out who've worked on it and continue to work on it, that it was for me, it was very much of like, okay, you can do this. Like not everyone gets to work on this comic. So like, it was definitely very kind of validating in that way.
What were you like? What did you initially feel were your challenges? Like, I mean, because when you're kind of doing something on your own, you create your own process and your own sort of like training scars, like all the your bad habits and good habits, like you don't know you're doing them. So like, did you like go, oh, whoa, like any of that?
Do you mean when it went from doing my own stuff to?
Yeah.
I would say, interestingly, because most of the stuff I started on was like future shots, which would be these 4-page sci-fi stories with the twist in the tail. And obviously that requires very compressed storytelling. But what I discovered was that the storytelling I'd actually been doing up until that point was even more compressed. So I had to kind of take the foot off the compression dial ever so slightly. I think in some ways the types of stories I've been doing up until that point were kind of tailor-made for 2000 AD. And I think one of the problems maybe is that I kind of got my brain locked into that type of formula of short story that kind of hinges on a twist, and that kind of made me neglect other areas, I suppose.
Gotcha. You're like, hey, here, like, well, I guess, I mean, using, film as an example, like, M. Night Shyamalan, he
A
had
little bit, yeah.
such a great twist in his first film that like he just kept trying to come up with another twist that was as sort of powerful, but it just never, they never landed to the same degree. Yeah. We're our own worst enemies, aren't we?
Well, the thing is, as well, it's one of those things where, like, I love twists in storytelling. So you're just kind of just doing that thing that you want as well, but you do have to do all the other stuff as well.
Well, yeah, because there's no story,
Yeah, absolutely.
Like you need to have a story, and the stories, and even if you have a story, if you don't have a good character, then there's the story is worthless. Like it's all very hand in hand, and then of course the ending, of course, is the most important part, because that's when the Ukrainian or the Romanian judges are standing there with those cards ready to put the low numbers up, so you gotta be careful. So what were you doing? I mean, I'm assuming that you weren't doing enough of the 2000 ADs to pay for that mansion you were living in. So like what were you doing like for that part of it? Were you writing for other clients? Like,
yeah, I would have been doing bits and pieces on comics, but mainly I would have been doing kind of copywriting and kind of writing for this financial magazine in London.
Okay.
So and there was kind of a lot of freelance copywriting and editorial stuff would have been the bread and butter at that time.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. I think that kind of stuff is super helpful. Any of that sort of external stuff where you're still applying the skill sets that of your dream business.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh, okay, because you learn, like, don't bury the lead, like when you talk to young comic creators and they're like, oh yeah, no, this is a slow burn. I'm like, no, don't make a slow burn. Like, like your slow burn is many, many years ahead of you. Get people in early. Yeah.
No, and I think as well, it's again, it teaches you to finish stuff, not be too precious.
Yeah.
Get feedback, all good things. And I think also just it's helpful even from a point of view of just learning about different subjects that are not comics, because I think that's another thing. Sometimes you find with comic writers is that it's a little bit incestuous. It's just kind of, people writing about the stuff they've always loved and like not bringing any other elements to it. Like,
yeah. And I think, and it's not to say that that's like terrible, because so many of our classic sort of comic runs are, the birth, the sort of the birth process of that. But like, it has been sort of the thing from that first generation of the late 70s creators, early 80s, where they were looking back at the comics that blew their minds back in the late 60s or early 70s. And then, came through these revolutionary approaches to comic books. And we're like, okay, this is great. And then like you know, the Gen X generation came in and were like, that's the model. And like, so we've been, they've been mining that sort of that territory for a long time. And it's not to say that there hasn't been original stuff. There's been far more original stuff than the sort of the you know, I'm blanking on the word, but it doesn't matter. But yeah, it's interesting. I mean, and it's fun because like I have a strong theory about like we all sort of peak interest stops at 12 years old. Like whatever we're like super into by the age of 12, we'll always be into whatever that is. And that's going to like carry on for the entirety of our life going, oh, I still love this, you know, whatever that thing is. So, which makes sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that. I think it's just that thing of making sure you're putting other stuff in the pot as well.
Yes. Well, that's, I mean, like the adage of like, you know, so many like, you know, with artists, you know, don't look at other comic book artists to be the inspiration for your comic book art, because it'll be derivative regardless, you know, in that sense. And there's nothing wrong with being inspired by other people, but go be inspired by as many things as you possibly can. And, you know, once again, that sort of that immediate read of artwork is that it's much easier to pick up on those things than it would be, you know, in a comic book story where you'd have to read the whole thing. You know what, this structure really reminds me of Starlin from 1977. But yeah, so like, where do you find your greatest form of inspiration?
Oh God, no, that's a deep one.
You better answer this right. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, Jesus. I think probably from, I think I get a lot, actually, well, this is one of the things of being in London, like there's a lot of theatre that I go to, and I find that a huge source of inspiration, just in terms of what can be achieved. Yeah, it's like other, I mean, comics for sure, but I think there's a lot of theatre and film that would kind of go into the pot.
Yeah.
And just listening to people chat.
It's so, it's like, it's such a freebie, isn't it? Like, it's so great. You're like, oh, like I remember hearing that legendary, you know, Quentin Tarantino used to go like hang out at the bar and just listen to people talk and like write down like the dialogue. And I'm like, yeah, like that makes sense. Like people will say the most ridiculous things. I would sit there. I have notebooks filled with what people would say, because I would be, you know, you'd be in the line for what we call the Department of Motor Vehicles here, where you're getting your license. Like I wrote down so many just nutty things that people are just talking because they're just.
And would you write at the time, or would you wait until you got back later?
Oh, I would write at the time. Yeah.
All right. Did you ever get caught?
No, because I would just turn my back and just, you know, write it down. It's like one of my favorite books, nonfiction books, is called Blue Highways by William Least Heat Moon. And it was done in 1981. And he's this guy who, you know, his marriage broke up. So he bought a Ford Econoline van, like that had like a sort of a sleeper cabinet, and drove around the country. And his interactions are just brilliant. But I'm like, how do these people remember the dialogue? Like it's so amazing, because it's not the same people talking. It's people all around this giant country, so you can really hear the difference in language. And I'm like, I think it's a magical skill. Like I think certain people have that ear and will remember, like reporters just have the ear for conversation. They can remember what happened. Do you read out? Do you read outside of do you read novels? Do you read nonfiction? Like, what is your?
I read quite a bit. I think I probably read more nonfiction than novels these days. And a lot of podcasts as well, actually. I think again, there's a certain bit of like not wanting to try and not be using my eyes all the time, because you know, so much of this is either staring at a screen or a notebook or whatever, that it's kind of nice to.
It really hurts. Like it does hurt by the afternoon. You're like, God, just please no. Like it's like, can I just go work in the yard or go walk in the woods? Like
some manual labor, please, just a little bit of
Well, I just did a whole week of manual labor, and I got to say, it's not fun.
No, I know. As soon as you start doing it, you realize it's not so bad sitting. And what type of manual labor was it?
Well, so we had a client of mine finally landed a great project they had been working on for years with Universal Music Group. They were just basically creating sort of they're called Instagram museums, or they're activations, like interactive events. Their client is Carrie Underwood. She's part of their label.
All right.
So she was launching a new album. And doing a live stream with Amazon she did last week. So they were like, this is the time to do it. So we designed up 6 different sort of themed things for people to go up and push a kiosk button and get their picture taken. It's great. Fantastic. I love it. But so I had to design the whole thing and sell it through. And then I was told, hey, you're going to have to actually go and oversee this thing. And that also means you need to help build it. I'm like, I don't want to build this thing. So, but it went off smashingly, and everyone was very happy. I unfortunately got sick in the process, so I'm not thrilled by that. So I'm going to lose 2 weeks as a result. So, so sucks.
Yeah.
I get the right.
Huh? That's true. You do get to,
Yeah.
It's funny, yeah. I think I'd be the same. I wouldn't be like, oh, I can relax and watch shows or something. It's like, no, I can work. I don't have to talk to anyone. Brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the toughest part is obviously I live in my home with my wife, so she's gonna have to be. I'm gonna be in the guest room, and she'll be in our room, and I'll just have to be masked up and careful for. Yeah. So sucks, but I don't feel terrible. I just feel a little under the weather. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, I had it around the start of January, and it was fine, to be honest. I just kind of had a bit of a head cold for one day, but
yeah, it's kind of what it feels. I think a few nights of good sleep, and I think I'll be feeling much better.
Yeah, definitely.
So you worked with Deck. So how did that all come together for you? Like, let's rip the veneer off and tell the truth after he lied to us. Obviously, and how it was all his idea and how he's the genius behind the whole thing. Let's say the real truth.
Liar and a charlatan. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Deck I've known for quite a while. I can't remember when I first met him, but I think we kind of properly started to get to know each other maybe around 2015, 2016, which would have been around the time I would have been handing out those kind of portfolios and stuff at conventions and stuff. And he foolishly was one of the people who took one, read it, and actually responded.
Sucker.
He'll regret that. But so we would have kept in touch then for a couple of years after, and just as I was working for 2000 AD, and then I think it was maybe 2018, he suggested that we possibly do a pitch together. Because he was looking to do a bit more writing, and he was, I'd been lamenting kind of the difficulty of breaking into the US market. So he suggested we work on this together to kind of help both of us at the same time.
Smart, super smart.
So it's funny because I don't think, obviously, Time Before Time didn't come out until 2021.
Yeah.
Which first trade is there. We've been talking about it for ages, and it was, I think you might have said on this that part of the reason why there was such the long gestation period was that there was another artist who was originally attached before Joe, and we were kind of waiting to see what happened there. But it was it's been co-writing with Deck has been my first time ever co-writing with anyone, really.
Okay.
So I can't really tell you if it's good or bad because it's the only one I have as reference.
Sure. How was dating your first girlfriend? I think. I mean, she did break up with me. So. Yeah.
Well, we haven't broken up. Me and Deck haven't broken up yet, but give it time, I'm sure.
All right.
Once Time Before Time still won't ever speak again.
Right. Like Simon Garfunkel.
Yeah, exactly.
Or Gallagher Brothers. Is that better?
Wow, that sounds like a lot more of a contentious breakup. How bad was the Simon and Garfunkel one?
Yeah, well, I mean, in history will be much kinder on Simon and Garfunkel. So I
Yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah. Yeah, hopefully we don't go the way of the Gallagher brothers. That would be awkward. Um, but so yeah, so like I think I'm trying to remember how it the exact nuts and bolts of it, but it was kind of I'd originally come to him with kind of a big mad sci-fi time travel idea, and
okay,
then I kind of got the impression he wasn't really into it, so we kind of dialed it back. Or no, I then came to him with, because we were both into crime stories.
yeah,
I kind of wanted to go for more of a lo-fi sci-fi tale, um, which ended up becoming Time Before Time. And then the way we kind of typically work is that I think we kind of realized early on that doing it totally 50-50 was never really going to work, that there had to be someone kind of steering the ship. And that because at the time Deck had a much busier career, it made sense for it to be me because I could kind of devote a bit more attention to it. So like what will typically happen with an arc is that we'll both have a conversation just about the kind of general beats of it. I'll go off and write an outline, then he'll give some notes. I'll incorporate those. We'll then present it to Heather, our editor. She'll give some notes, and then we'll move forward into scripting. I'll kind of again be kind of doing most of what Deck will call the grunt work, and he'll do his scenes and stuff, and then kind of I'll stitch it all together. We'll both go over it, show it to Heather. She'll tear it apart and make it much better, and then we ship it off to whoever's drawing that particular issue. But it's been interesting. It's been one of the. I think we were talking before that there have been times it's been really beneficial because obviously having Heather as an editor is really useful. And like it's great to have. There's times it's great to have multiple brains, and then there's other times that you kind of end up in a kind of a committee thing where you're trying to just reach consensus on something. But it's been a really interesting. It's been my first thing of like a long form series of this length as well. So it's been great to be doing that with someone who's got more experience, like within the publishing industry.
Right, and I mean, it's got to be his longest, writing, work as well. So he's, sort of involved with this whole thing. So I mean, you guys really are getting. I mean, it's probably the longest thing you've written as well.
Oh yeah, unquestionably.
Yeah, I mean, so like I think that's like one of the dreams is if you can get a project where you can kind of keep working on a project for a long period, you really get a lot of learnings.
I think and I think that's one of the, particularly with some, well, I suppose with most creator-owned things, not specifically Image, but I think that's the interesting thing is that like you have to plan for so many eventualities. Like you have to be going into it with a series that like has both the potential to be a long series, but also has to tell a satisfying enough story that if it wraps up after one volume, it's still a good experience. And it's been really interesting as we've gone along. Like we've had the ending in mind for quite a while, but you kind of have to build these back doors for yourself every now and then just to make sure you don't totally get cancelled abruptly. Like
totally. Yeah, because you never know. I mean, it's like a television sitcom, in the States, or television series. It's like, it's like we only did 14 episodes. It's like, oh, that's a shame, so in and out. And so like, but like, by the way, the new art is looking great also in the series.
This is cover for issue 14, which is will be out in July.
Yeah. It's cool. I love the this is very cool.
Yeah, it's a kind of a, because it's this volume is starting with a 2-part story. So we got a kind of a connecting cover variant by Vlad Agostiev. I hope I haven't butchered his name, who's a really talented artist. And yeah, I think it looks fantastic.
It does look fantastic. It's very good. I like connected covers. I think they bring a lot to a comic book. Like it's just, if not anything, forces you to collect both. Or
well, I mean, can't deny that wasn't a part of the equation as well.
Yeah. So what's the story behind this? Write It in Blood, because this is you working with Joe.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, go on.
No, I'm curious how this all came together.
So this Rory and Blood is an interesting one. And actually, the gestation time started after time before time precedes it, but obviously came out afterwards. And because when we were in that kind of uncertain period with that other artist, Dec suggested I start developing another project as well, and was recommending that it possibly would be a good idea to try something in a slightly different genre to Time for Time. Obviously, they are both crime, but one is sci-fi crime and one isn't.
Sure.
And Joe was an artist I'd worked with on a couple. We actually broke into 2000 AD at the same time and did a couple of stories together. And I can't remember. I think was it Owen Maron had been tabling near Joe or something, and he suggested him to Dec, who then suggested him to me. But I know I feel bad because I think I heard him on your show previously just about the difficulties he had with the book. Like I think his work is fantastic, but I know it's not a style I think you would like to go back to.
I mean, it definitely. I think it sits outside of his comfort zone.
Yeah.
But he did a great job. He did a brilliant job with it.
Yeah. No. It's I just feel awful whenever, because sometimes we'll meet up and he'll just be going on about how difficult a process it was for him. But I think you would say as well it helped him, if nothing else, to figure out what he likes and doesn't like.
Yeah.
But so this book then was kind of maybe there was a degree of wanting to kind of see about writing without having the kind of a big flashy high concept of a sci-fi story as your protection almost, and kind of making it totally about characters. Like this is a lot more, I would say, of like an atmospheric character piece, and kind of channels a lot of, like, I've always been a big fan of stuff like Fargo, and kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Martin McDonagh and kind of his plays and stuff like In Bruges. So it was just kind of channeling a lot of interest in those kind of stories into this. So we were working on this for quite a while, and it actually kind of crossed over. We were still waiting to hear back from Image when the pandemic kicked in. So at that point, we kind of concluded that they probably weren't going to be getting back to us for quite a while. So we ended up releasing it on Gumroad initially during the pandemic, and following that, when things kind of got slightly more back to normal, they agreed to publish it as a collection to kind of not help, but I suppose kind of, it was a good way having it come out around the same time as Time Before Time. Kind of both books kind of helped each other in that regard.
Right. Yeah, that's good. I mean, I mean, fortuitous timing, but unintended schedule.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, I mean, everything that I read from this was just sort of that riveting thing. And I mean, I think In Bruges is a really wonderful sort of inspirational sort of touchstone to call out, because that film is just wonderful.
No, it's one of my favorite films. It's just
when we went to the cinema to watch that, we were just like, okay, can we have more of this? This is just it was so on point. So so what else? I mean, what do you? I mean, how much longer are we? I think I asked Dec. I don't remember what the number was, but for Time Before Time, how far out are you guys going with this?
We've got a few more volumes to come. So we're on 3 at the moment. We're writing 4, and there will probably be there'll be one more arc of the main story after that. So about 5 in total.
That's great.
But it's really great that we're kind of being able to. We're not having to cut it short or anything.
That's great. The story is wonderful. I mean, if anybody who is watching or listening has not, checked it out, absolutely should, because it's a really, really interesting spin on time travel. It's a great story. The characters are really good. So we're all big fans of it over here. So more, do it all. So are you spinning up more creator owned stuff, or are you looking for cross stuff to work with, any of the bigger publishers? Are you trying to do the back and forth?
Well, I'm writing Spawn for
Right.
Todd McCartney Productions at the moment, so that's been a very interesting experience working on that.
Yeah.
It's, no, and I mean, I work developing a couple of creator-owned things at the moment, but it's always juggling plates, isn't it? You kind of have to. But it's been great to both, because creator-owned and work for hire stuff. It's exercising such different muscles, and it's great to kind of be able to do both at the same time. Because I think if you're doing too much of one or the other, you kind of, certain parts of you would start to atrophy a bit.
I say it often, but I think it is a golden point in time for comic book creators that they're able to, like, the industry is cool with you doing big two publishing stuff, but also, and I say big two, that does not just, say the two big two, but, and then also doing independent stuff. So like, if you're doing creator owned and then you're doing your own thing, like, everybody seems to be very comfortable with this back and forth, creative process, which I think is the result why we're getting so many great, comics now. Like, it's not just this, we got another good run on Daredevil. Yay. Like, we're getting a lot of good stuff all over the place. And I think, like you're saying, that atrophy factor is less prevalent because of this.
And I think because, like, there are so many more avenues. You're also getting, like, people are doing, if someone's working on a Daredevil book, it's typically because they really want to be on a Daredevil book, and that, like, rather than they desperately need a paycheck, which probably happened quite a bit in the past. I mean, I'm sure it happens to some degree now still, like, but it's it's definitely. I mean, obviously I've only been in the industry for a certain amount of time, but it seems like there's a lot more awareness amongst people about kind of thinking of the longevity of their careers and kind of making sure that they have. Because, well, the other thing is that you kind of have to work. You have to invest in yourself a bit. Like, Deck is always big on this, that, like, working on big two properties and stuff is great. And, like, people do tremendous work on that. But at the end of the day, you don't own that stuff. And you have to kind of also make sure you're looking out for yourself and not kind of getting too dependent, because one day it might not be there. And it won't. It's not even a case of it. It might not. It won't. Like, someone else would come along. And
I ran into somebody this last week who, a security person at this event that I was working on, and so we're talking, and he's, I used to work in the Secret Service. I'm like, oh, okay. I'm like, that's interesting. I branded a company years ago, named them and branded them, that had some people who were in the Secret Service. Well, it turns out that's the company he is the vice president of now. Like, the person who I worked for hired him however many years ago to do, to take this role. It's like, that's that small of a thing. And he was just making a joke as we were saying our goodbyes. He's like, well, I'll talk to him about seeing about maybe you getting a royalty, because, like, the company is just huge now, and they're making so much, money on what they do. And like, but that's not how it works. Like, the work for hire world is, you do the job and you get paid and you move on. So, but when you create these things that are your own, they're the things that will, they'll go out there and they'll work for you, and they'll always be there for you. So, I think it's great. I'm super excited. I can't wait to see how you guys land the dismount with your book.
Well, yeah, hopefully we'll live up to expectations. It's there's some fun stuff coming up.
That's good. All right. Well, we're gonna cut it here because you have things to do. You're a very busy man. You're in the big city of London town.
Yeah,
So I'm sure you have a crime to solve or something to do.
yeah, or a crime to commit. Who knows? You know,
Nice. But that's probably a better way to get more material.
that's true.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So wait, I have to push the button. Hold on a second. All right. Hey, there I go. This is the official thing so people know. Hey, Rory, thanks for joining us, my friend. It was really a pleasure to talk with you. You can find Rory at Rory McCONVILLE 2 Dose on Twitter. You're not that busy of a Twitterer, are you?
Not hugely, no. I mean, most of my time is spent trying not to be honest, but
I get you.
I fail. I fail.
I know. Well, it's easy to get caught up. Well,
I'm also trying to find Rory McConville 1 and
yeah, well,
original Rory McConville.
we can find that guy.
Yeah.
We can take care of him. So, yeah, find him, follow him, tweet with him. He's a good person. Good luck, man. We'll talk to you soon. Okay.
Cheers, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.